Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. My name is Gabe Green. I am the Director of Artistic Development at La Jolla Playhouse. And thank you for joining us for another Coffee with the Playhouse. We're in the midst of previews for the world premiere of To the Yellow House, and our special guests today are playwright Kimber Lee, director Neel Keller, and one of our fantastic Playhouse artisans, scenic charge artist Melissa Nalbach. While we wait for latecomers to take their seats and pour their coffee, let's jump into some Playhouse trivia. As always, email your answers to marketing@ljp.org for a chance to win a gift card for delicious coffee. Here we go with the first question. While Associate Artistic Director at La Jolla Playhouse, Neel Keller directed the 50th anniversary production of what classic Moss Hart play? That's right, Neel Keller's tenure, I believe, was 1997 to 2000 as Associate Artistic Director. So if you're stuck, you can always jump into our production history part of our website and do a little sleuthing. And you can always keep your ears open because oftentimes the answers will come up in the midst of conversations. All right, here's our second question. Kimber Lee's work was last seen in San Diego in 2016 at both the Old Globe and Moxie theaters. Name one of those productions. As it's been a few years since Kimber's work has been here, and I know San Diego is hungry to see her work again. Our final question. The yellow house of the title refers to Vincent van Gogh's home in which town in southern France? All right, write those answers down, email them to marketing@ljp.org, and you'll be entered into a drawing for that $10 gift card. It's been wonderful welcoming back patrons in person to our theaters over the last 2 months, and we can't thank you enough for your support and patience as we work to maintain the safety of our patrons, staff, and artists. This past Wednesday, Diana opened in New York, marking the 33rd Playhouse production to transfer to Broadway. And it all started here at the Playhouse with your support. And of course, if you can't make it to New York in the near future, you can always watch the streaming version that Christopher Ashley directed on Netflix. In other exciting news, we recently announced the first 4 shows of our 2022-23 subscription season, including the stunning new musical Lempicka, the world premieres of Mother Russia by Lauren Yee, author of 2019's acclaimed production of Cambodian rock band, and Here There Are Blueberries, produced in association with Tectonic Theater Company, with whom the Playhouse produced 33 Variations and the Laramie Project. And finally, On Guard Art's acclaimed production of Fandango for Butterflies and Coyotes. It will be in our season. There are 2 more subscription shows that will be announced shortly, including another new musical and a reimagined classic to be co-directed by Will Davis and Christopher Ashley, the Rich Family Artistic Director of La Jolla Playhouse, the latter of whom joins us now. Welcome, Chris.
Gabe, thank you very much for that introduction. I appreciate it. It's good to see you. So I apologize a little bit. I'm speaking to you from an airport conference room. So we have fluorescent lighting and I look a little bit like I'm in a hostage video, but I'm not. I'm delighted to be talking to you. We have just launched on our Weiss stages previews for the world's premiere production of To the Yellow House. And our guests today are the play's writer and director, along with the Playhouse's scenic charge artist, whom I'll bring to the screen in a bit. But first, let me introduce to you Kimber Lee and director Neel Keller. Kimber's acclaimed plays include Untitled Fuck Miss Saigon Play, Tokyo Fish Story, Brownsville Song, and Different Words for the Same Thing. She's developed work with the Lark Play Development Center, Berkeley Rep, Ojai Playwrights Conference, and many others. She's a Dramatist Guild Fellow, a member of Ma Yi Writers Lab, and winner of numerous playwriting awards, including the BAU Institute Arts Residency Award and the Bruntwood Prize International Award. Neel, meanwhile, is making a Playhouse homecoming, having served as a past Associate Artistic Director when he directed, and I'm going to give away one of the answers to the questions, School for Wives, Light Up the Sky, Loot, Diva, and the Cosmonaut's Last Message to the Woman He Once Loved in the former Soviet Union. I feel very proud that I said that without stumbling. His more recent productions include the world premieres of Eliza Clark's Quack, Julia Cho's Office Hour, and Kimber Lee's Different Words for the Same Thing. He's currently the Associate Artistic Director and also Literary Manager at Center Theater Group in Los Angeles. Please welcome to the screen Kimber Lee and Neel Keller. Hello and good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think we have all kinds of different environments. Kimber, you're in are you in housing,
I am.
Jolla Playhouse housing, great. And Neel, you're in the lobby.
I'm in the lobby of the Weiss. I've moved in here for the last 2 weeks. I brought a little, unlike Van Gogh, I brought like a little bedroll and a cup of coffee, and I haven't left for 2 weeks.
I admire that you're both advertising your own show and upcoming Playhouse shows. I feel very grateful for that as artistic. So I guess, could you both start us off by talking about what got you into theater to begin with, and were there any mentors along the way who helped kind of lift you up and help you along the way?
Yeah, I started doing theater, like many people as a kid at school. There were school plays and things that happened, and I've just sort of wandered my way into this playwriting thing that I'm doing now. And there have been many people that have been kind of instrumental in that journey. And I think that the place that has contained the most of those people is the Lark Play Development Center in New York City, where I was mentored by Arthur Kopit and also many other playwrights that came through the programs that they have there. And also Lloyd Suh, Krista Williams, and Andrea Hebler, who were Lark staff when I was around, have just been incredible mentors and supports to me throughout everything.
I love that. You should know that Arthur Kopit also talked you up behind your back when he was doing a play at the Playhouse. I think he said your name to me 5 separate times of like keeping on encouraging me to make sure that I had read all of your recent work. So he was a real fan.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Neel, how about your beginning in the theater?
I think I decided sometime in college that I was interested in trying to do some theater. I sort of didn't know what I was going to do. And, and basically I moved to New York with no idea of what to do or how to do it. And I had some interest, I think, in directing, and through a very lucky, literal, series of phone calls and stumbling and being in the right place. Chris and I were there sort of at the same time. There were a couple of wonderful organizations. I think of Gene Passanante at what was the original New York Theater Workshop on 42nd Street. I remember going there, talking with Gene and Morgan Jeunesse about theater, about directing. I remember Tony Kushner was on staff at New York Theater Workshop at the time, and we used to go on Mondays. I will never forget as long as I live. This was the height of the AIDS crisis. I moved from college to New York and felt like I had moved into a world that was difficult to explain to friends and family who weren't there what was going on. And I remember going in on the Monday readings at 3, and once a month or once every 6 weeks, Tony would have new pages of what became Angels in America. I remember those days. And so those were the days that I think galvanized me. But yes, I'd made the right choice, and this is the world I wanted to be in. And then there were a series of lucky mentors. Bernie Gersten, much beloved at Lincoln Center at the time, really gave me a boost and a hand up and looked out for me in a way. And then, of course, I, at some point in those early days at New York Theater Workshop, also met Michael Greif, who eventually I brought him to Chicago to direct shows at a theater I was running in Chicago. And then when he came to take over the Playhouse after Des, Michael asked me to come and be his associate here. And, that I think of my career in phases of places I was. It seems like that's how it's been. And not like Van Gogh in this play. And my period of my yellow house, in a way, was my period at the Playhouse with Michael and all the directors who came through, and tremendous mentoring and learning in the Forum and the Weiss. I think really how to direct and how to direct at theaters of this scale. And I often think now in my life, a lot of those original mentors of mine are no longer with me. And I think, who are the mentors? And I feel like in the last, 8 years or so, maybe because I've had children too now, I'm finding that I'm being mentored by often people sort of in slightly different crafts than directing, and often people who work on shows, people like Melissa, who's the painter on this show. I think of crew people, I think of what I learned from Deb Hatch. I think always what I learned from designers. So I think an interesting thing is happening to me now, and I'm sort of being mentored by people at a different part of the chain in a way.
I love that. I don't know if you remember this, but you were at one of the early readings of one of Tony Kushner's early drafts of Angels in America, and I was the literary manager at New York Theater Workshop at the time, and he gave us 50 pages of rewrites for the 12-person cast 12 minutes before the reading, and I yanked you out of the audience and said, "You're helping me Xerox." So we were madly Xeroxing to make the deadline. to put them in the actor's hands so they could read them to the audience.
There, you know, I think of those moments, and I think I never thought or planned that I thought that as a director, my career would center on new plays, but I think it was those days and the excitement of new pages, the excitement of the thing coming to life as you were part of that and in the room. I think it's what ended up sort of leading me where I've led, because now I feel like almost exclusively I do new plays.
There was one, I can't believe I have such a vivid memory of this moment. We were Xeroxing, and at one point you were like, have you looked at these? You were like, fell into reading it. You were like, you can't read it. You have to keep Xeroxing. We'll hear it. But, like, it was really exciting to.
If Tony Kushner hands you a page, you read it. Like that's you know,
read it. That's the sad truth of it. Kimber, can you talk about the inspiration behind the Yellow House? What intrigued you about Van Gogh in this particular period in his life?
Yeah, I, you know, just like a lot of people in the world, I think I was always drawn to his work. I always found it very moving and found it difficult to kind of explain to myself why that was. And then I was going through a very personally difficult time myself back in 2014, 2015. And during that time, I picked up a biography of Van Gogh called Van Gogh, The Life by Stephen Neifert and Gregory White Smith. And reading, I think it's a huge book, but I think I read it in like 3 days. Like I almost didn't sleep because I was so immersed in it. And there was something about the cycles of difficulty that he had in his life that I had known nothing about. I had the thumbnail sketch, the same thumbnail sketch that everybody has about, you know, brilliant artist, ear thing. But this reading about his early life and how he found his way to painting, and then how long he was painting and working until he was able to find what he wanted to do as a painter, and all of these things that I never knew. And it really spoke to me because I think sometimes in our culture, we are very good at speaking in very inspiring ways about difficulty and struggle and the importance of risk and the importance of being able to fail. But then when it actually happens, it feels very different than the noble, inspiring speeches. And you have to, when you're in the midst of that, find a way to pick yourself up and keep going. And something about the way that he, with his huge heart and his determination, was able to always pick himself up and find a way to move forward really spoke to me. So that was the seed that the play came from.
I love that. So you're talking about obstacles and struggles, and here we are struggling to come out of the theater shutdown after such a long period, 600 and some days of hibernation. Can you talk about what it's like to be back in rehearsal, back with an audience? It's Kimber, this is your first time in kind of full production again?
Since the pandemic?
Pandemic, yeah.
Yeah.
What's that like to be back in rehearsal with folks and back with an audience for either one of you?
It is so, and Neel can talk about this too, it is so overwhelming in so many different ways. I think that, you know, even though we've been working and planning and doing Zoom meetings and everything for so long, I think there was still a tiny part of my soul that was like, nah, it's never going to happen. Even when I was walking up to the door of the rehearsal room on the very first day, there was a part of me that's like, really? Is this really happening? So it's been a process of sort of like waking up almost from a long sleep. Like there's these parts of my soul that went dormant while we were not able to be in a room together. And the things that Neel was talking about, the thing that is always so beautiful about being in production with a play are the conversations with the designers, the everybody, the actors, the designers, the production staff, everyone focused on trying to figure out how do we make this thing together. It becomes a process of community making of the thing that we are then going to share with a community of an audience. And that part of it is always moving, but especially after this year where we've been sort of forcibly separated from one another and separated from each other's physical presence, being able to come back together in the room is really wonderful.
Neel, thoughts?
Kimber and I have been talking about this every day, and each day it seems brings a new thing. I think the beginning of rehearsal felt sort of unbelievable and happy, but also surreal to everyone. And of course, we were wearing masks in rehearsal, and so some things were different, but fairly quickly it began to feel like familiar, like oh right, I sort of remember this. But that sort of happened at every step. You've had to sort of remember things. And just the other night on our first preview, I was standing in the back of the house with Christian, who's working with me as my assistant on this show, and we were going over some notes or something, and we weren't paying any attention. And at some point, the ushers opened the doors to the theater, and so we were right in the middle at the back, and then people started filing in, in our peripheral vision, coming down the aisles. And there was this moment, even though we'd known, of course, we had a show that night, there was this moment of, oh, there are people in the room. It's not just those of us who've been working for 4 weeks. There's suddenly people, and that's always an exciting moment in the old days. Because you thought, oh, I'm sharing this, but it was very different this time. It was like, oh, the thing we do, this ancient, traditional storytelling thing that we do has not died during this time. There felt like this sort of very long historical force of those people entering the space to hear a story that was really moving, surprisingly moving. And because I had not been expecting it.
I was surprised in the rehearsals I've been in, since coming out of hibernation, you get back into the swing of rehearsing it, and it feels like new, but there's something so satisfying about being back in rehearsal. And then you get a break, and everyone has forgotten how to do small talk. Like there's this weird, I don't know how to just hang out with people anymore. It's just been so long since there's been any hanging out. It's funny watching people kind of relearn, how's your day kind of conversation.
It's so true.
So here you are at the fourth preview.
I think tonight will be number 4, I believe.
Yeah.
Can either or both of you talk about what the process has been like in terms of how the production and the script have kind of talked to each other and revealed things, and how the addition of the audience has what it's taught you?
Well, I'll start back sort of at the very beginning. Kimber has, as a director, at least for me, perhaps the most moving moment in any process is the moment when the playwright says, I would like you to work with me on this play. I think there's something about you that can help me bring this play to fruition. And so when Kimber talked to me about the Ale House and sent me the play, I was immediately intrigued, as I always am, because Kimber does the thing I love most, which is she writes really interesting, empathetic, compelling characters and puts them in plays in which, on first reading, you have no idea how it could possibly be staged. This play has the challenges of, I don't even remember, 20 scene changes to different locations, time jumps, songs, different techniques, time lapse, all kinds of things. And so you're like, how is this possible? And then that becomes the fun of trying to figure it out. And I have in the plays I've worked on with Kimber, I've always ended up with the same solution, which I think she somehow instinctively embeds in these plays, which is that it requires a community of people, that something about the number of scene changes and the life of the play is that there is a large body, a company of actors who are going to be on stage, who are going to, in very sort of simple theatrical ways, help each other, move furniture, help with costumes, themselves become scenery in some scenes, that their bodies and their humanness are the way that you can create this mutable, changeable, transforming, epic world. And that's exciting. And so we started designing the show, imagining just the cast Kimber had scripted. And that was a challenge to figure that out. And then because we were at the Playhouse, and because the Playhouse is associated with the graduate school at UCSD, there was a need, willingness, ability to include a number of MFAs in the company. And then our community grew, and it became the scale at which there was a community that could, I think, realize the world that Kimber had created. And so in a strange way, the sort of galvanizing moments, I think, of our design and production process were the introduction of that additional ensemble, and in a way, the pandemic shutdown, because the play and our thoughts about the design of the play changed when the story of a person who is repeatedly knocked down, who is told he can't do the thing he loves, who has to sort of pick himself up with resilience and begin again, began to seem the story that all of us were going through. And so then we sort of reconceived, I think, our approach to the play as it became more meaningful to us during a time when we had been told we couldn't do the thing we loved.
That's great. Kimber, thoughts about the process you're in the middle of?
Oh, I just love what Neel just said. And you know, the reason that I work with him whenever it's possible is because he does have this kind of glorious combination of, you know, heart and love of the work, but also sort of an engineer's mind. He's like got the mind of an engineer, but he purposes it for theater. So I know that all of these things that I'm putting on the page create complexities in realizing them. And I know that that's a challenge that Neel will not only rise to, but kind of enjoy in some kind of way, trying to figure out how are all these pieces going to fit together in this final thing that we're going to make. And just, you know, being in production is delightful for me. Like, one of my favorite things is sitting out in the dark in the house with the designers while they're having the conversations, while Neel is talking to them, while all of us are talking about what we're seeing and communicating with the actors. It's just such a magical thing to have conversations with so many brilliant people who are so enthusiastically involved in trying to make the thing that we're all trying to make. And everybody's also really wonderful human beings and hilarious and fun to hang out with. So this is a great thing as well.
I love that. Jack, I'm just looking at the comments section. Jack Cassidy is calling out how fun it is to see the MFA actors, who I think are doing beautiful work on stage. And there's UC San Diego folks kind of all over the theater, backstage, in stage management, in every design team. So it really is a collaboration. Yeah.
I would say too that our MFA acting company, they are so wonderful. They have come into the process with so much heart and enthusiasm, and they have provided a huge lift for everything at every stage of the process. It's just been such a gift to have them in the room.
I totally agree. Thinking, Neel, about your time at the Playhouse, which was actually before the Potiker was built, right? Were there still trailers when you were on staff?
There were still trailers. Yes, there were trailers. There was no view patio. There was no. We rehearsed in scattered spaces that were either UCSD theater department rehearsal rooms, or there were even a couple of like old bungalow-like buildings that were over close to where the Jacob School of Engineering is now, which of course was not there then either at the time. So I think right in my last year, there were the beginnings of the plans for what would become the Potiker. They were different plans at that point. We were working with Frank Gehry, but the idea of beginning to build something and trying to conceive what that would be was sort of beginning in my last year. Yeah. That's right.
There's so many things that are different, both in leadership and the physical space. Is there something that feels like a through line of the Playhouse? Is something kind of quintessentially Playhousey, Neel, that's still true?
Well, you know, there's much. There's, you know, I lived for 4 years above someone's garage at Windansea Beach. So Windansea Beach seems like a through line to me. I've been back for many sunrises, sunsets. But you know, the spaces, you know, and even the new space, when we arrived, and I had a production meeting, I think, over in the new office building next to the Potiker, and I noticed that there was a room that's dedicated to Ellen Ravel and a room that's dedicated to Dorothy Johnston, and they were both formidable and important women in my life who were on the board at the Playhouse. There's a photo of Dorothy here in the green room. And being, you know, in the Wise, I just have so many memories. You know, I was remembering the other day hysterical moments spent with Barry Manilow, who is the last person in the world I thought I would ever become friends with. Didn't know Barry Manilow, was not a fan of Barry Manilow's music, and we became fast friends working on his musical here. And we used to stand in the little grassy area in front of the Weiss while people walked by hoping to see Barry Manilow, talking about it and not even noticing they were walking right by him. And I remember Barry saying, "This is always what happens. As long as I stand here quietly, they don't even know." And we would stand before every show in the grass out in front. And so, yes. And I think also the idea of support, Kimber and I have talked about, I've directed at a lot of theaters, and there are only a handful that I feel like could have supported Kimber's play in the way the Playhouse has supported it. And I feel like that is a real through line, which I think back to Dorothy and people like that. But I think the Playhouse has been interested in doing this play, I think, for 5 or 6 years. I can't remember. It's been through many iterations, including getting through COVID. And throughout all of COVID, there was never a moment's hesitation that eventually we would do it. We didn't know which theater it would be in, but the Playhouse remained committed. It is a large play. It has required, all kinds of technical things. It's required hours of rehearsal. And there's sort of a belief and a support in a play and an artist, which, even though we're in different rehearsal rooms now, and in a way much nicer rehearsal rooms in the old days and all that, that feels very much, that sort of bedrock support seems a signature of the Playhouse.
I love that. Well, Kimber, this is your first time at the Playhouse, although we have been, as Neel referenced, we've been trying to get you here for 5 years on this play. I feel like a complete sense of satisfaction that we're about to open it this weekend. But you're kind of a San Diego. You're all over the San Diego stages between the Old Globe and Moxie. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience has been at the Playhouse?
Oh my gosh, it's been amazing to be here in so many ways. Everything amplified, of course, by the experience that we've all been through. But it's just been such a pleasure. And knowing that there was this long conversation that was happening between myself and you and Eric Louie, especially, who has been such a wonderful advocate for me and my work. So finally getting to see it all. I don't know. Sometimes I just think like life is always a winding path, and we have our plans about what we're going to do, but there's always a turn that you're not expecting. And the path that this play has taken and the path that the Playhouse is on, and the way that those things intersect has changed and morphed so much over time. But now that we're here and having this amazing experience, I just can't help feeling in all ways like, well, this is where we were headed the whole time. We just couldn't see it. So it feels like it's fulfilling something very satisfying. And I'm just so happy that it all worked out.
Me too. Seems like a great moment to invite our third guest to the screen. So the scenic design for the show is, as we've been discussing, a real challenge, creating the scenes in cafes and the streets of Paris. And I'm not going to give away the other trivia question, but a small town in southern France, all while trying to evoke Van Gogh's kind of vision of the world. So here to talk a bit about how the Scene Shop was part of bringing this world to life is the Playhouse scenic charge artist, Melissa Nalbach. She's had following 10 years as a banker in the banking industry. She made a life change to pursue her passion in the arts, went back to school, graduated from Cobalt Studios Scenic Arts program in 2015. That summer, she traveled to San Diego to work on our world's premiere musical, Up Here. And then she was so extraordinary, we offered her a full-time position, and she has served as the Playhouse's scenic charge artist since 2017, working on dozens of shows, including Fly, Escape to Margaritaville, Cambodian Rock Band. So welcome, Melissa, to the screen.
Hello.
Hello. Are you in the shops?
I am in the shop right now at my makeshift office in the back here of the paint shop. So yeah.
I love it. So can you maybe just, for those of you, for those audience members who may not be familiar with scenic charge artist as a job, what do you do?
Basically as a scenic charge artist, I just run the paint department. So my job here includes dealing with budgets and ordering supplies, and also gathering a team together, and then working with our technical director and the scene designer to make their vision come to life. So we figure out how we're going to make that, what products that we're going to use, consider actor safety, all that, and then also doing it within, a certain budget that we're given. So how we can make that all come to life.
So the scenic designer on this, Takeshi Kata, had a unique vision for kind of backdrops as a important part of the show. And there's a particular cloud drop that required all kinds of R&D to implement and to help integrate into the lighting and the projection design as well. Can you describe the process of creating that drop?
Sure. I was really excited when I learned we were going to be doing a drop. We don't always get to do drops in shows anymore. So that was really exciting. And then to do a 3-dimensional one, which I've never actually done before myself. Talk had actually designed a cloud drop that had this really cool dimensional effect for a Hartford stage. And thankfully, there's scenic charge artist there, Kurt, was really great and detailed everything. So it kind of helped reduce our R&D process. So we had a good starting point, and it was a really effective approach. So that really helped us cut down on time. We did end up having to, normally we just do small samples, but for this case, we ended up doing a pretty large one, about 12 feet tall by 6 feet wide, because we were going to have the opportunity to have the scene designer, lighting designer, and projection designer come to kind of do a little test run to see if it's, effective and what it was that they wanted. It was a pretty cool process. We got to lay it down on the Weiss stage. Thankfully, the Weiss was empty for us, and it just required doing lots of layers of batting over netting. And then we had to transfer his design pattern that he drew. We started ripping it apart and building up layers and layers and layers and layers of paint with that. It was also an interesting process because we necessarily didn't know if we were achieving everything or what it was going to look like until it was hung up and lighting projections went on it. Even after we finished it, you could see here, there's a little time lapse of us working on it. We actually had to move it downstage, if you notice, because we had our Diana viewing, and the projection for it was quite large. So we had to make some room for that device. But it was a really cool process. Yeah, it was a little labor intensive, but it was a lot of fun. Couldn't have done it without our 2 scenic artists, Jen Imbler and Carolyn Kvass. They were a huge part in for that, especially Jen. She was really integral in the sampling process. But yeah, it's really effective then once it went on stage. It was pretty cool to see it up, and it's been cool seeing what Masha and Nick have been able to do with it and create some really beautiful scenes.
I've heard you talk a little bit about that. You actually had to develop some new tools to create some of these.
Yeah, that was actually for there are 3 flying frames in the show, and we talk one of them to kind of have that Van Gogh thick paint feel to them. These 3 frames also are automated and move throughout the show, and they also needed to be a surface to be projected on. So we had a little challenge because he wanted actually to make it look like dimensional paint, but obviously buying that larger quantity of heavyweight paint wasn't really going to work. And we also had to work with our technical department to make sure we had something that's lightweight enough for the rail system. So we needed to create those tools, which probably would have been created with, a palette knife, but we needed something on a large scale, and a lot of tools that we already have are quite stiff. I even went out and bought a cement tool, but it had a nice shape, but it's pretty stiff, so it wasn't doing it. So one of our welders here, Tim, was able to take one of these bad boys and then modify it and make it into one of these. So we kind of basically just made a giant palette knife, which is what we needed to help create those shapes. And there was a video earlier of Jen and I smushing the texture in. We ended up using a product called Elasticoat, which is used for patching and sometimes for roofing. But it's great because it was really lightweight. It kept its shape and dried fairly quickly. So yeah, all in all, it was a fun little project to figure out.
I love that.
Yeah.
Could you talk about, Melissa, you've worked on so many shows at the Playhouse. Is there one that really stands out in your memory?
There are so many, too, but I wanted to say I think Fly, our last production before COVID, was a really, really fun to work on, especially in particular the pirate ship. It's really great because, what we do is we work off of models that the designers build. So there's photos of the model and then of the actual piece. So it's great when someone's I think Anna was oh my God, I didn't even think it could be that good. And it's exactly what her model looked like. So that was a huge compliment and, in what we do. And that one was really fun putting together. Also, there was a moon drop that we had to put about, I want to say thousands of little sequins, different shapes all over that. They had a previous one, but it didn't really survive being in storage. So we had to make a new one. But that was a really, really fun process. And we had a cool time lapse of us making that as well. But it was just a really fun, colorful, sparkly show to work on. Yeah.
I love that. It's Jack Cassidy in comments saying that he also thinks you could flip pancakes with it. So you may have like a copyright rating.
Yeah, it would be good. A little floppy, but yeah.
Also, Marianne Wesson is asking about the decision to not show some of Van Gogh's more sort of famous works. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of decisions about what to represent on stage in terms of Van Gogh's work, and also the sort of decision of what period of his work to represent?
I would, Kimber and Neel might be able to speak more to that, because we want to stick with what was within the play. And I'm assuming there was an idea of like, we don't want the literal thing, but the impressions of it, and kind of just keeping with the colors and the strokes that he did. But I'm sure, Kimber.
Yeah, Neel or Kimber, do you want to grab that one?
I would just say, like, I think it has to do with the period of time, the little slice of his life that we're dealing with, which are these 2 years in Paris. And if you get a book, there are books, giant books. He was very prolific of his work. And you flip through chronologically, what you'll see is all of his work leading up to Paris was very much working with darker tones, gray. There was a lot of grayness and this pearlescent, luminescent kind of cloudy grayness that was happening in the Dutch school at that time in his work, until he went to Paris. And in these 2 years, you see the colors start to emerge in these ways. And so what we're dealing with in the play is both that sort of arc of his discovery of color, but also the way that emotionally resonates with where he was at that stage in his life. And so in all the discussion with all the designers and Melissa, the conversation was really about, like, how do we show that movement from these grays and everything into the colors that he would become known for, but not quite get there, because he's not there by the end of this play. This play ends when he is right on the verge of that work. And Neel has a great, Neel and I have talked about it a lot, and he has a great way of talking about the discovery of color that happens.
You know, it was very important to Kimber. She said to me early on, the story of this play is in essence his discovery of color. And so we tried to plan a production that would do that. It's interesting now, being where we are, because had I known Melissa, and had I known Melissa's talents would be deployed on this show 2 years ago, we might have said, let's try and make some of those paintings more realistic. You know, when you plan a production, you don't know what's going to be achievable and not. And one of the reasons to stay away from the realistic paintings was you don't want to do ones that don't actually look like the paintings. You know what I mean? That look like you attempted, or you bought posters at a museum shop and or something. And, I also feel like always in the theater, you want to somehow excite the audience's imagination. And there's an actor playing Van Gogh who everyone knows is not Vincent van Gogh. We're showing a lot of the empty Weiss theater. So, you're not actually in Paris. You have to use your imagination because it's clearly the Weiss theater and all that. And I think part of the paintings were that too, this idea, not just in the smaller canvases that at one point in the show represent Van Gogh's paintings, but in these large screens in the sky drop Melissa's talking about, there's a sense of Van Gogh's vision of Paris, of his own experiences, being things he was trying to capture on frames and on canvases, and being frustrated by that, the momentary capturing of it. And what did he see? How did he see the world versus other people? And so I thought all of that just felt like we can indicate color across a spectrum of these canvases in an abstract way, in which the audience will become partners with us in the imagining of the actual paintings and the actual work. And so I think that was sort of the idea, I think.
Yeah.
I love that sort of those last moments where, as Kimber's sort of talking about, that like that the artist he's about to become starts to bubble, right? I mean, you start to sort of see the shift into the thing that's really going to break him through to a whole new phase of his artistry. Melissa, you're getting some great shout outs, both you and all the scenic artists at the Playhouse.
I love it.
Very well deserved. Gabe, do you want to come back on and we'll do a little bit of Q&A and anything that you've been talking about with us too?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks everybody for all the questions that you've asked so far. Please keep sending them in. I wanted to, Kimber, we've talked a lot in rehearsal. Of course, there was a lot of historical research done in the course of preparing for this play. You've very specifically chosen 2 years in Vincent's life during which much less is known. So he and Theo were very frequent communicators. They sent letters to each other every week throughout their lives. And this, of course, because these were the 2 years in which they lived together, there was not as much occasion to send unless one or the other left town for a couple of days. So the historical record is a little less populated in this era. So I guess the question is, how did you juggle the desire for historical fidelity as far as these characters are concerned versus your desire to have artistic freedom and creativity over how these characters behaved?
That is such a great question. And it did drive me a little crazy for a while because it's the first time that I've written a play that dealt with a real historical character. And so I felt a lot of responsibility to be portraying things in an honest way, which doesn't always mean historically factual in every way. I will say that most of the events in the play are directly based on things that did happen. But because, as you say, there are these 2 years where he wasn't writing to Theo 3 times a day, we have a little less information about his day-to-day thoughts. There are reports from other sources about the general shape of that time and what happened to him, but I became more interested in the outline of that and just witnessing what happened to his painting throughout those 2 years and then directly after. So it gave me this little wedge of freedom where I could sort of imagine his relationship with this woman, Agostina Segatori, who was a real woman that he did have a relationship with. She was a model for many famous painters in Paris. And his relationship with his brother Theo, which was sort of the bedrock of both of their lives, that went through a very difficult period because they had never lived in the same apartment as adults, except for these 2 years. And it was difficult because they were very, very different personalities. And there was a little bit of mystery about why he left to go to the south of France, that Theo expressed in a letter to one of their sisters right after Vincent left Paris. And so that gave me a little wisp of something that I turned into the play that we have. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really, in doing the research, it's fascinating because Theo was very meticulous about keeping all of Vincent's correspondence throughout their lives. And I think, so nearly or just over 700 of Vincent's letters survive. I think fewer than 70 of Theo's survive because Vincent tended to burn them after reading them. Not a sentimental person in that regard. So the benefit is we know a lot about Vincent, but there is this sort of missing part from the other side. Neel, I was curious because we've talked a little bit about Tak's scenic design. Both you and Kimber have spoken of this play as a memory play, and indeed it is Vincent in that southern France town, reflecting back on the 2 years that have just passed. How did your conversations with Tak result in the scenic design? Like, how did the memory playness of the show impact the design?
Well, it's interesting because it's one of the first questions I asked Kimber. I remember was why is it a memory play? And then Tak and I certainly started, I think, sort of on 2 fronts. We've done many, many, many shows together, and so we have a collaborative relationship I really enjoy that often takes place over extended periods of time and sort of just talking about plays and things. And so I think we started both with how do we convey memory? At the same time, we started with what are the logistical demands of the play. There's a scene in the play where people climb up the staircase in Montmartre to the top of the hill, which is a very long, steep walk. And so we knew it's important somehow to have a second level. We'll need a staircase. So there were sort of a conversation that just was dealing with logistics, and then there was a conversation more that was dealing with the feeling and the spirit of the piece. And at some point, because of the pandemic, and during the pandemic, at different times when it looked like the play was going to get rescheduled at different times, and then of course it got postponed again and again and again because of the pandemic, the show tentatively moved into all three of the Playhouse spaces. And so at some point in redesigning and designing and trying to refine the ideas for those different spaces, I think the idea of memory in the play became somehow intertwined with our journey of trying to imagine how to do productions again. Like what was the production going to be when we came back? So it became sort of our memory of what productions had been in the day when you didn't think about COVID or safety, or would audiences feel comfortable sitting next to each other, or what is your feeling of returning to a theater that you used to go to 6 times a year and now you haven't been for 2 years. So suddenly his memory and that idea and our sort of evocation of memory and return to a place that you had known in the past became part of the physical production too. And we began to, I think, to embrace and celebrate the empty Weiss Theater, the idea of trying to incrementally build back the parts of memory that he needed. And of course, that also freed us up. The idea of memory freed us up to, which was important in this play because of the number of locations, to try and be very specific about what are the elements that he would have remembered. What are the elements in that cafe that were important to him? You know, not the walls, not the ceilings, not right, but a certain table in that, because he made a painting of that cafe in which he was very much featured the tables, the very specific tables that looked like tambourines. And so we've recreated those tables, and obviously Augustina. And so her dress, you know, this got into costume design as well as my conversations with Talk. Like, what are the elements of the brother's apartment that would have been important in memory? And so it then became, we found a lot of pictures from the time and became immediately interested in all the construction that was happening in the 1880s in this neighborhood. It was exploding, this neighborhood. And the hill was being basically stripped bare, and things were being built, including the huge cathedral at the top, but also lots and lots of houses. And so the whole hill was surrounded by this wooden scaffolding. And there's even a famous painting of Van Gogh's where they also built on top of the hill a view place out of the same kind of wooden scaffolding that they were building around the houses and buildings. And that scaffolding became, in a way, a structure that we thought we could use both to evoke that period, something he would remember from that period, but also in its structure, it became sort of a memory cabinet. So it has nooks and crannies and pockets where during the play, furniture from one scene can just be stored and not have to go off stage because it's still somehow in his memory. So the production really became this sort of skeletal memory cabinet built out of period scaffolding.
It's interesting hearing you talk from sort of artist perspective about the many, many times we postponed and gave you new dates. I don't know that how much the audience knows this because we really didn't kind of keep messaging and remessaging all the many steps of all the schedules that we were working on at the Playhouse, but it was an unparalleled, in my experience, set of kind of decision trees of like, okay, if we can get back into performance 3 months from now, then how do we repopulate all of our spaces? Okay, 3 months seems too optimistic. 5 months, 6 months. Okay, what about social distancing? There was a whole period of time where we analyzed all the seats for how many people could you get into our spaces if there had to be 6 feet between every audience member. So like there's been all of these kind of evolution of plans and plans within plans and decision trees. And certainly if you had asked me a year and a half ago, would it be 650 days of like the theaters closed, I would have laughed at you. But it turned out to be so much longer than I think any of us expected. But it was hard on artists, right? I mean, almost all freelance artists were unemployed, and certainty was a thing that no theater could give, right? It was always, we hope, we'd like to, we aspire to these dates. But almost every artist had every production kind of scheduled and rescheduled many, many times.
I have to say too, like, because I have so many friends who are either laid off or productions were flat out canceled, or heavily postponed, that in every conversation with the Playhouse, with Eric and everyone, about the dates, and progressively as we went months deep, I just felt so incredibly fortunate, I guess, because it became this sort of little boat on a dark sea with a little lantern that kind of I was able to float through the kind of the rough water, just having that little light, of possibility that something might happen, that something might come back. And it was very comforting during that whole time. And I know that for Neel, it was also something where he was able to, have a space where he could be creative, thinking about the play, and having the support of the Playhouse through all of that was just really incredible.
There was a period, I think there was a period, maybe it was around last January, I don't remember, where I just felt, that from a professional point of view, I sort of didn't know why I was getting up in the morning, and anymore. And I called Talk at that point, the set designer, and I said, "Do you have a model?" I said, "I need a model. I need a model in the house." And he did. Melissa has the finished model behind her, I think now, but this model Talk originally had was a simpler white model. And we both live in LA, so I drove to Talk Studio. We had to be socially distanced. He left the model on the curb for me in a plastic bag. I picked up the model. It was very sad. We couldn't sort of see each other, but I brought this model home, and I put the model up in my dining room, my table, which is often where models are sitting. And there's a time of day where there's an afternoon light that comes in and lights the open side of the model and casts that beautiful light across the pieces of the model. And literally in my house, I have two children who've grown up with models. It was like life came back in the house that day. I had just plopped this model on the table. We all came sort of in around dinner time, and it was glowing, and it had its little furniture pieces in it and all that. And then that model stayed at my house for, I don't know, 3 months. And Kimber's right. It was both sort of the promise that it was going to happen. It seemed to be the physical embodiment of that. And it also allowed me to do the thing designers hate, Chris will know, which is I was able to move the model around. And so I was able, because the model is a very small dollhouse. And so I could reach in and lift huge pieces of scaffolding and say, "Oh, if this pivoted off, if this could move," and so then I would call Talk and say, "Hey, I think I've got an idea. I think if this humongous structure actually moves," which is very easy for me in the model. And Talk said, "I'll call Will at the Playhouse." And now I watch it every night, and it moves. And so yeah, that period, to have a show to think about, to be reminded, as Kimber says, that we were on some circuitous path, and we didn't know how we would get where we got, but it always felt like the Playhouse was committed that someday, somewhere on that circuitous path, we would all get together and do this play. And that was a great comfort.
And it must be said, blessings on every member of the crew, all of the artisans and craftspeople that have, like Melissa, put their heart and soul into creating all of these amazing things that we have now with us on stage to build our world. It's just been incredible to watch those things come into being.
And I have another question for Melissa, but before I do, Jack Cassidy has asked of Kimber, during the long pandemic delay, did you change your play very much?
I normally would be fidgeting with things, and definitely I fidgeted with things throughout the rehearsal process. I even added a few things because we had our wonderful MFA actors, and I wanted to get, within rules that we have, I wanted to give them things to do. But this play actually has happened to have a very long and winding developmental path. So, fortunately or not, in March of 2020, we were kind of ready to go with a production draft. So it didn't change as much as other plays have in other processes.
Yeah. I'd love to just throw to Melissa one. We were talking about the sort of pandemic period, and some folks at the Playhouse stayed involved with Zoom readings and the digital work we did and the work of development went on. And there's lots of sort of administrative work that happened digitally. But for the people who's like who are going to paint a piece or hang a light, there really was a full-on layoff. Was that hard, and how did you make it through?
Yeah, definitely hard would be one thing. Yeah, we did not come back to the shop probably until July of this year. So it was like a solid year and a half of no solid work. It was definitely a tough time adjusting to that, but trying to find work here and there. But we all survived. Some of us are still here. Sadly, we lost some people to other industries and stuff like that. So there's definitely been the challenge to find the people that we used to have to work with us. So the one of many downsides from it, but we're back, and it's exciting to be back and be in a daily flow again. So yeah, and creating things.
And it's part of as you read the newspapers, and every industry is going through just this massive adjustment of who's doing what with their lives, and kind of reconsideration of who is your job fully satisfying to you. It's such a time of evolution in our country for people's relationship to their work and their lives.
Yeah,
we're delighted that you're back, and there is something amazing about being back in the community of people. So much community kind of reform.
Absolutely. And it's been a sorry.
No, please, after you.
I was just going to say, a true pleasure to have all of you here. And for those of you who've been watching who missed a portion of today's chat, or you want to point a friend towards today's episode or any of the other episodes, please know that you can view all of our Coffee with the Playhouse events on our YouTube page, and don't forget to subscribe.
I want to thank our amazing guests, Kimber and Neel and Melissa. And thank all of the audience members who have joined us. We can't wait to see you at the Yellow House. Thank you for your support of the Playhouse as we've begun in-person performances again this season. We're going to leave you with a video that expresses a little bit of our appreciation. It's hard to express the fullness of it because you've been so incredible through this period. But this video talks a little bit about our joy of coming back together again with the staff and the crew and the artists to make theater again on our stages. So thank you to all, and you can roll the video.
It's been a while.
Thank you.
Since the lights flickered on, actors took their places, and we sat on the edge of our seats as a new story unfolded. But while stages were dark, our theater was very much alive. Artists were dreaming and creating. Behind the scenes, we were painting, stitching, and building, rehearsing, and planning to welcome you back. Now we come together again, tested but stronger, changed but better. Welcome home.